Hello, everybody, and welcome to Untethered.tv. I'm your host and founder, Rob Woodbridge. If you are like me, maybe you are, maybe you aren't, you live and die by your calendar. This has been the thing that I have, from a digital standpoint, that I have used, loved, hated, loathed, and certainly managed my entire life. And I live by that calendar. And certainly when I moved into the mobile space, when I got my first iPac or Palm. Back in the day, calendaring was the epicenter of those applications because it was not connected other than a sync. So if you're like me, you've lived through this digital revolution of calendars, and really nothing has changed. Nothing until this application changed me. It knocked off every other calendar app off my iPhone, and it is now at the front and center on my base bar when it comes to using this. It's called Tempo, and I have the co-founder Raj Singh on to talk about Tempo. And the things that we're going to talk about are so important around what I believe, and I know that Raj believes, is the calendar as the platform. It's contextualized. It knows everything about you, who you are, where you're going to be, who you're going to be with, what time you're going to be someplace. And boy, oh boy, do I ever think that there's huge opportunity that hasn't been unearthed to this point. So I'm going to bring Raj in right now, and we are going to go into this. Raj, thanks for doing this. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for inviting me to the show. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, I got to tell you that I know that you believe the same as I do, that this calendar is becoming the platform. It always has been the platform since the old agendas that you used to carry around in paper form and Post-it notes and everything they used to do. And I don't think that there has been a revolution in calendaring, really, since I started using it.
I think there's been a lot of stuff that's been in social calendaring. I think over the last 10 years, event discovery, friends are going here, you may want to check this out based on taste. There's also actually been a lot of stuff in scheduling. So I don't know if you remember TimeBridge, Tungle. And what's interesting is most of obviously the social stuff is not really productivity focused. It's not really focused on your day. It's about things that you may not be doing that you may want to go check out. The scheduling side of things, what's interesting is we kind of did, we spent a lot of time thinking about scheduling, and we kind of did an analysis. And our conclusion, and this is not to say that people don't schedule on our phone, but our conclusion was that complex scheduling was actually still happening at the desktop. And the mobile first experience with respect to scheduling was more quick adds, is what we call it internally. So typically tasks like drop off kids, pick up so-and-so from the airport, this particular simple reminders like dentist appointment or your call John, whatever it might be. Not the, here's the 5 participants, here's the notes, here's the attendees, here's the location that we need to specify, and so forth. That we're still seeing for the most part on the desktop. Now, of course, the question is, will that at some point translate over to the mobile experience as well? And it's happening to some degree on the tablet. But if you keep that in mind and you think about what the mobile first experience is with the calendar, what we found was, and this wasn't sort of just anecdotal, this was actually looking at people using their calendar. They open their calendar 5-6 times a day. It's very normal. It's probably the second or third most used app on your phone. And they're usually just checking to see where they have to go next. And what we found was often they would open the calendar and then jump into another application. So it was either calendar to address book, because they have to make a call or text somebody, calendar to email. But sometimes it was even more complex. It was sort of calendar into maps to then search for a place that they have to go to, or calendar maybe even into Dropbox, so they have to pull something up, whatever it might be. And the realization that we had when we saw this sort of behavior was, well, why not just make those quick actions from the calendar itself? Internally, we've started describing the calendar or Tempo as the keystone in an arch. So these are your other sort of supporting apps, but the keystone's the glue or the metadata that pulls it all together.
And that's, I just wrote down, is a calendar is the gateway. It's the same thing, right? It is absolutely
a launch
pad.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of people have talked about regency and use of and reuse of applications. Staggering statistics, mostly for mobile apps, that a staggering number never get launched a second time. So it seems only natural that companies would attack the ones that are being used effectively. Mailbox for email, You Guys for calendar, and Q and a bunch of other calendaring apps. And then music players, podcast players. These are the things that people go back to over maps. They go back to over and over and over and over again, and it just seems logical. But it's got to be difficult to be competing against applications that, in theory, are already onboarded. They're part of the OS. They're part of people's use. You're competing for literally, front page space, front screen space on these devices. That's got to be a challenge for you guys.
Yeah, so let me give you some background actually how we even landed at Calendar.
Yeah. We jumped way ahead. We jumped way ahead here. On my agenda here, we're on like number 7 here, but let's just keep going here, and I'll come back to you in a second. Is that okay?
Okay, all right.
So,
internally we describe it as companion versus replacement, and the majority of apps within the App Store are new experiences. They're companion applications, and the bar for companion applications is tough. As you rightfully pointed out, usually never gets a second launch. 99% of them, 99% attrition after the first month. It's very, very challenging. For the most part, you need some kind of network effect to drive enough group use to create the benefit for you to stick around and keep coming back. And there are examples of applications that do well, like chat, for example, can be very sticky in that kind of mantra. One of the things that I was able to benefit from was, and this kind of ties into why we chose the calendar, which we can talk about in question number 7. So I won't spill all the beans. But one of the things that I benefited from was in my previous life, I was working with a company that was trying to replace the browser on the phone, and there were some interesting learnings that came out of what worked and didn't work in trying to replace the browser. And so, take a step back. What is the bar to replace an app? And so, the biggest tell, the two biggest tells were, one, you have to support every feature of the native app if you want to replace. As much as you, in your particular calendar use, you may never set 2 alerts, or maybe you never use Week View, or maybe you don't do 0-minute meetings at midnight, or whatever it is. The reality is there's still some percentage of the population that uses these obscure features of the calendar, from my opinion, that you need to support. And so we spent a lot of time trying to support all of the features of the native calendar. That being said, we're not 100% coverage. I want to say we're 90% of the way there. We have all the views, and there's most of the features that we support, but we're continuing to sort of attack those low-hanging things that we were completely not blindsided by, but just surprised by how many people, do multi-day recurring events. So that was sort of one interesting learning. The other thing that is very non-obvious is if you're trying to replace an experience, and there's certainly people who are going to disagree with me, you don't actually want to change the user experience too much. And that may sound weird or counterintuitive, because you want to completely revamp the user experience and create a new kind of view and move where the buttons normally are for exit the meeting and add an event and settings and so forth. But our data from our user testing found that in a niche audience, you certainly can attract a new user base with a new user experience. But the power users of the native application want the buttons in the same place that they were, want the similar kind of interaction model. And so what's fascinating about Tempo, and we've been thinking about doing a blog post here, and we haven't published any of this yet, but is the iteration of UI from what Tempo looked like in March of last year, which was when we had our first version internally that we were sharing with people, to February 2 months ago. It's completely changed. And what's fascinating, it started being very, very different, and it ended up looking much more like a calendar, in terms of much more like the iPhone calendar, with the buttons in the similar locations, similar kind of interaction patterns of the views. And we believe that's necessary to achieve sort of mass adoption.
It's so fascinating. Like, you know, that would be an incredible blog post, because I always ask, you know, what was different from the time that your ideas when you launched the application to the point where you are right now when it actually came out. And I want to talk a little bit about that in the beta program that you did up here in Canada, because I'm fascinated by that as well. And we'll get into it. But, you know, we've talked about Tempo now for a second, just around, you know, the change in, you know, in perception for me that Tempo brought to my calendaring experience, right, is that it's always been, you know, a dumb thing that I always input. Now it's kind of one of these smart things that is giving me back based on what I do input, which is something that I love. So for those people who have never heard of Tempo or are still in a waiting list to get Tempo, and you just launched in Canada, which I'm thankful, you know, you beta tested here, launched in the US, came back and launched in Canada. So can you describe Tempo? Because it's not just a calendaring app, and I think that it would be good if we could just have a quick description of that.
Yeah, there's sort of the elevator pitch description, which is it's a smart calendar. It pulls together everything you need, makes your calendar actionable. But the sort of longer vision, which is I think what you're asking, is we think of the calendar as a proxy for an assistant. And so sometimes we call it a disguise, sometimes we call it a Trojan horse, but the thesis is it's an application that's really simple, well understood. It's something that you already use, but really what's happening in the background is you're giving us an opportunity to learn about you. And the question is how we can use that information in the future to be more proactive and anticipatory as an assistant. Siri, you know, we're a spin out of SRI, Stanford Research Institute. Siri obviously was a previous spin out of SRI. Siri is one flavor of an assistant, and they're not competitive. It's a different kind of assistant. But Siri is not contextual. It's what we internally call a pull-based assistant. You ask, it answers. It's an open intent model is what we call it. So you can ask anything. It's an open intent, and by definition, it's very broad and shallow, because you can ask anything. It doesn't go deep. When we were thinking about what is the right application to bring assistant-like experiences into, we said, well, what application on your phone has the most context? That was the question. And there were pros and cons. I mean, we looked at Address Book, and we said, okay, well, what can we figure out based on your call logs? We looked at SMS, and so what can we understand based on who you're messaging with? We looked at email. Email is obviously a huge tell. And there were some interesting pros and cons in each of these applications. But we landed at Calendar, and the reason we landed at Calendar is what we liked the most about it was multifold. One, it obviously is a timeline of the future. We like to say it's an expression of intent. But two, it resonated even from a business model standpoint, which maybe is less interesting for this conversation. The audience of people who use Calendar and use it heavily, there's a direct correlation between potentially monetizable users. And we had seen a number of attempts in the address book space. Obviously, Mailbox had a great acquisition, but we'd seen other attempts in the mail space and lots in the SMS space, and it wasn't clear necessarily how to monetize. And so the calendar had a range of sort of multifold benefits. Of course, virality was another reason we liked the calendar, because we thought there was opportunity to drive some of that K factor, that network effect. But that's sort of how we landed at Calendar. And some of the pain points were inspired from a previous life running business development for the first time in my career, because I'd been an engineer and product manager most of my life. And I do truly believe you can't design a calendar unless you've been double booked.
Absolutely. Yes, welcome to my life. That is exactly. I mean, it is a pain, and I want to just key on a few of the things that you talked about in there. Is that, I mean, what I heard in there was that you went after. There was intent in what you were doing. You were looking at all the tools that were available to you. So you talked about address book, you talk about email, you talk about SMS, and you said, listen, I mean, where's the intelligence layer that we can add to those that, maybe nobody's doing, or maybe, it's the least point of friction? Because I watched the Scoble interview, Robert Scoble's interview with you, and you talked about, listen, same way you built the UI is that it had to be something that there's no friction. People can get into, get out, get comfortable with it, and then start to explore a little bit deeper once they get the comfort level that they understand that they can use it effectively, install it, and so on. So is that where you had an intent? You went in there with specific, you said, you didn't just say, look, we're going to build a calendar app. What you said is we're going to build something that has intent.
No, absolutely. No. So if we go back in time, so October 2011 is when we sort of kind of figured this out.
Yeah.
And we said, and then the question we kept asking ourselves was, we knew that the next wave of computing on the phone was going to be context and anticipatory. Now they have words for it. We were calling it something else back then. And so we said, the question we kept asking is, what is the next assistant, right? Here's Siri, the whole world's clamoring for the next Siri, and all we kept seeing were a bunch of Siri clones, right? Siri clone X, Siri clone Y. What was the next assistant? And so the thesis from the very beginning was use the calendar as a hook to get you into the experience, create some value, create a better experience. Internally, we call this 3 days versus 3 weeks, beautiful and smart. 3 days is the beautiful. It gets you hooked. 3 weeks is what keeps you there. It's the smart. That's the retention. The way we architected the system, what's really interesting is from day one, we built it with that kind of intent. And what we're actually seeing now, because there's a lot more noise in this space, is a number of folks trying to pivot into recognizing that this is a category that they need to have a story around. But the problem is you don't build intent-based systems overnight. It requires its own unique architecture to be able to architect a system that can really understand you. And you're going to see some announcements with Tempo through the summer, around, like a state of the calendar industry report, and we're going to be able to generate that because we have such fascinating data comparing between cities, between companies, popular places, by job title, all sorts of information.
See, that's what's really fascinating to me is the data that gets pulled out of this, and I will come back to the data. We mentioned, I will come back to that because I think that that's a gold mine. It's oil, right?
And to be frank, we do. There's a lot. So there's a lot of calendars in the App Store, and actually the number one calendar in the App Store is a period calendar. If you were trying to have a baby, but there's holiday calendars. There's a lot of calendars in the App Store. We, to this date, still think of ourselves as the only company running big data on the calendar, just from an architecture and how we use semantic analysis to understand the calendar, which in part is why we had to introduce the reservation line in the first place. It's very computationally heavy because we are generating all this sorts of data, but we're past that, and that's a different conversation. But as you said, I think you're going to we'll have a lot more interesting things to share in the near future.
And I mean, would it be safe to say, like, in all of this, that what Mailbox did, just kind of because everybody compares this, and I know Scoble does the same thing, is that Mailbox intelligence and data crunching and streamlining your email process. So the difference between what Mailbox is doing in email and what you're doing in calendaring is that all they did, and I use Mailbox, but I got in there early as well. So I've been using it for quite some time, and I like it. I mean, it's not overwhelming because email is broken, right? And all they're doing is putting this kind of layer on top of a broken package, which is email, and they're doing a very elegant job of it. I think the difference in what you're doing with Tempo is that you're creating, and I keep coming back to this, you're creating the platform. It is an operating system of your life through the calendar. So it's no longer just calendar. I think even smart calendaring is kind of making it sound too simple, right? Is that
so I absolutely agree with you. Mailbox doesn't meet our definition of smart. That's no disrespect to Mailbox. I think it's a beautiful user experience, and it really appeals to a GTD kind of personality, but it doesn't our definition of smart is an understanding. You're dead on in sort of describing calendar as a platform. we like to think of it as the Uber dashboard,
Yeah.
of your life. It's time in motion. To your point that calling it a smart calendar is a disservice, what's very interesting about that is I want to say for 9 months internally, we kept debating what to title the app. And people have no idea, all the different titles that we went through. We went through everything from Tempo Smart Assistant, Tempo Smart Calendar Assistant, Tempo Assistant, Tempo Smart Calendar, Tempo Intelligent Calendar, Tempo AI Calendar, Tempo AI's. Like we literally had spent days and days of just debating over the period of 9 months what the adjective should be and what the noun should be. And the reason we landed at Smart Calendar was not, we recognized it was underselling the vision. And a lot of, part of the challenge we had with the word smart was smart has become so cliched. Every application describes themselves as smart, so it doesn't really add any value. So there was some strategy here, right? So we named the company Tempo.ai. AI creates a perception, and so we thought that intelligence comes from the branding of the company name itself, and that was in some ways very lucky. We didn't realize like how well that would play out, and the fact that we were the first .ai domain, and that had some interesting benefits as well. But that seems to have stuck, and then the word smart was something, God, we debated forever, and we couldn't find a better adjective. The reason we chose calendar instead of assistant was, again, similar to smart. We found that assistant has become very cliche.
Yeah. Yes, it has.
Everybody calls themselves an assistant, and we thought, although it would be underselling itself, that calendar was simple enough that people would understand to get us a broader mass market appeal. And that's sort of how we landed at that name. And actually, it's hard to know if it would have been different if we had chosen a different name, but I think it was the right choice. All that aside, from a outbound press sort of marketing communication sort of standpoint, the world perceives us as a smart calendar. And part of that is because that's the story we've been telling. Through the summer, and as we start introducing more proactive and anticipatory experiences, more of those layers will be unfolded, which will start opening up people's eyes that, hey, wow, I would not have expected you to do that in my calendar. That's really interesting, and I think that's coming. But we needed a launch, and you got to learn, and that's sort of, we're going through all of that right now.
I can appreciate that. Is that just like you want to make sure that the functions and the UI and the UX are still the same as a base that everybody else is already used to. I can understand Smart Calendar. That's fine, and at least you didn't name your company Smart Calendar, right?
Oh no, not at all. And Tempo.ai, we love the name. Tempo means time, rhythm, beat of life, which is tempo of life. And we're the only .ai domain, and so that makes it cool.
I mean, it is, and I don't want to chastise you about the name Smart Calendar, but it just seems that once you get into it, you quickly realize that this is a super freaking smart calendar, right? Like, I guess you couldn't call it that. So we talked about this. There's so much I want to get through with you, and I don't want to rush this through. So if we don't get through all the questions that I have, too bad, because we're gonna dive into some of these things. But one of the things that I was so interested in is I talk about this all the time. I'm in Canada. Canada has a relatively small population. It's 32 million, 33 million. It's basically the same size as California in terms of population. But you guys beta tested up here, right? You just kind of did a soft launch up in Canada. To walk through that experience and why do that in Canada?
We had iPhone and iOS as a platform doesn't make it easy to beta test.
No, it doesn't.
They have something called Test Flight. You don't have to use Test Flight, but effectively, you can distribute to up to 100 people and test, but you're limited up to 100 people, and that makes things difficult. One of the challenges as a semantic company that people don't realize is we have to effectively run the algorithms on a set of data, see how we do, and then rerun it. It's not a problem you just throw money at. It's sort of a time-bound problem. You have to take the time see how you score, iterate, see how you score, iterate, and that sort of progresses over several months. And unfortunately, there is no annotated calendar data set or mail data set out there. The researchers tend to point at things like Enron as the only large sort of email corpus in the world, but it's a bit dated. Things have changed, and it doesn't have accompanying calendar data, and calendar is very transient. So we recognized early on that we needed to test with more data. But in addition to sort of testing just with more data to see how our algorithms do, the second part of that was we wanted to validate a few things. We wanted to validate our keywords, some various sort of App Store optimization related things, keywords, user experience, how people are using it, the onboarding flow, and also, even test, if we wanted to buy users at some point in the future, what that would cost, how that would work, and so forth. And so we needed to choose a country. It didn't have to be Canada, but we needed to choose a place where we could do this launch a little bit under the radar, and mostly because the U.S. population is too large. So two things with that. One, we renamed the app name. We didn't call it Tempo. We called it Tempo with two E's. And the second thing is it was less polished, and its polish is still an ongoing thing. Don't get me wrong. We're trying to improve sync and other things, but it was definitely less polished than it was at launch, especially from a UI standpoint. But we chose Canada mostly, and this isn't any disservice to the Canadians, but mostly because we're a semantic system. The Canadian cities, location database, phone number patterns, zip code, very similar to the U.S. and so it didn't require much more additional work. You don't think of Canadian English as too different from American English.
No.
So it was very easy for us. And that aside, there were plenty of people saying, "Hey, no, Raj, you should go to Singapore, do Australia," But no, we said, we're going to do Canada. So everything I'm going to say about my Canadian launch is not. This is sort of when we were in beta, is not the most positive things. And I think there's some things that you could do better or worse, and we learned from it. And I now know in the future how I would do things differently. But we put it out in Canada. One of the challenges we had out of the gate actually was calendar, and the productivity category is not a organically downloaded category. I mean, people don't really search for calendar or alternative calendars. So just putting it out there didn't yield much at all. Completely undiscovered. We're just sitting there, 4 downloads a day, 5 downloads a day. I mean, it was really a joke. And that was part of the problem was, okay, we're not able to even get enough data to effectively test, which is part of the problem. And the thing is, we didn't want to do any PR or even make any announcement or really even email anybody out of fear that people would figure out that this was the SRI thing. And one thing that was not necessarily working to our advantage before launch was everybody was trying to figure out what was the next thing SRI was working on in terms of post series. Right. So there was a lot of people like trying to peel under the cover to see what's going on. So we ended up buying ads in Canada to buy our users that way. That was semi-effective. But another sort of challenge we had was there was no credibility. It was sort of like, okay, here's this app. And so it was surprising how many people were just not connecting anything. They weren't, they'd connect their calendar and location, but maybe not their email, and so forth. And one of the things that's funny about that is when we officially launched, the delta in number of emails connected between our Canada testing and what happened in the US launch was 8x. The ratios, and it was such a staggering difference, it completely threw us off in terms of server capacity, because we actually had done some of our load modeling based on our pre-release in Canada. And to be frank, you're the first person I've talked to about this externally, because we never told anybody that we had done a soft launch in Canada, but I suspect you knew that already via John.
Yeah. Well, no, I didn't mean to out you, that's for sure.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. Most people don't know that we had done a soft launch in Canada before we launched in the US. So there were some positives out of the testing, and there's certainly some things I would do differently if I were to talk to other app providers as they go through a similar kind of challenge or testing process. One, we were able to validate some keywords, which is good, and figure out like, okay, what kind of description we liked, etc. Two, we were able to get some interesting data on our onboarding flow. So you're buying these users. Many of them would at least go through onboarding, so you could at least see what was working, what was not working, and we were able to iterate and improve on that. And we got a little bit of data from the usage pattern. What's interesting was one of the most useful things that we found out of the Canada alpha or beta, whatever you want to call it, was the volume of people creating meetings in the first couple days. And what we realized was that was their way of testing to see what it does. And it's very Siri-esque. The first day of Siri, you ask a lot of different questions to see what it can answer. And we had a very similar kind of behavior with the calendar. And we recognized that we didn't change much in terms of the UI with our US release, because we kind of were running on such a tight timeline. We didn't create enough time to sort of address everything that we learned from Canada, but it was validated with our US launch again, where we see very heavy add and edit meeting in the first couple days. And again, it's people trying to see what Tempo can do. We're going to obviously introduce some new things in and around add and edit meeting here in the coming months. But it was interesting. So it was definitely a good learning experience. I think when you hear third-party people who test out of market, some of the things that they don't tell you that works to their advantage is, one, they often have an existing application or other applications in market, so they can cross-promote. Right. So they can go under the radar, cross-promote, but still not raise any coverage and use a different name and so forth. One of the things now that we're post-launch is we have been toying with the idea of doing pre-releases in another country. I don't know where. So it's feasible that Canada might get the next version before the US. I don't know. But we've been playing with some ideas in how to do some of this testing. And it's tricky for us because Tempo is used a lot. The people who use it daily. They use it multiple times a day, and they're running critical parts of their life with it, right? Their calendar. And so, we make a change and it breaks something or it changes, it's a big issue. And so we really have to test things out before we put it out there.
It's almost like if you do break something, it's over, isn't it? Do you ever get that sense that it's that serious, it's that dire?
It's true that, we haven't done a good job with this. We've had sync issues, we've had login issues, multi-device issues, the reservation line. I'm very thankful that we have some patient users. I also realize we have some users who are upset and may not give us another shot for 3 or 4 months. It is true that the calendar has to be perfect. You live and die by your calendar. That being said, a lot of the stuff that we're working on right now, and even in the next month, is, to be frank, is to sort of fix that last mile. Little deltas, make sure it's perfectly in sync, make sure your alerts trigger when you switch time zones, that we're going to start running in the background so we can keep in sync, things like that. And then we'll ask the world, hey, if you tried Tempo before, that was 1.0, now it's 1.5, okay, and it's way more bulletproof and stable, and then let the games begin. I think all apps experience
Absolutely.
this. I mean, there's no such thing as a hardened app at 1.0 in today's world.
No, and it's the great thing about this industry, and even what you're doing, is that it does get shaped by the user base, right? By the data and the flow of the data, and certainly how people are using the application. But it must have been a shift for you guys. So you are embedded in SRI. You're spun out of SRI. Very, very much a theoretical implementation of calendaring. So now you're going up a little bit more into the platform, calendar as a platform, and we will talk about where this goes in a second. But so, you're in that mindset of you're developing, you're moving things forward, you're bringing in new concepts, you're connecting, my calendar to my email, to a map, to parking, to like, you're connecting all those things, and you're in that engineering mode. You launch, and I'm not even talking about in Canada. You put it out in Canada, you get a little bit of feedback, which is great because it's like a small beta anyways. Canada is your beta country. Do it more often because we Canadians get the apps like 6 months down the road, and that's never good. Do your beta in Canada. You get a little bit of learning. You then come out under like the spin out of SRI. You've got the branding and you've got the endorsement so that people start to log in. And then everybody does, right? Robert Scoble says this is the greatest thing ever. He does he wrote up a review of all of these different calendaring apps, and Tempo was always at the top, and your interview was great. And then what happens to your development team? Because they go from that deep in mind, we're recreating something here, to putting out fires, right? Ultimately, that's what it was. So how does that change your company when you launch? Because pre-launch, you're in head down engineering mode. Post-launch, what was that like?
So I do have some benefit of having been through this before. So I'd launched a couple apps in the past, and I had made very aware to the team that, guys, pre-launch, post-launch, everything will change. 50-60% of your time is going to be just maintaining and reacting to what's happening, and that's not obviously good. But we had kind of built that into the plan, and so you are dead on. And unfortunately, unfortunately, the day of launch, we blew our internal estimates in terms of downloads by 10x, or it was like 11x or something like that. I mean, it was crazy. And since then, we've hit our numbers through summer, in terms of where we thought we would be. The unfortunate reality is, that first month and even first 3-4 weeks was very reactionary. It was sort of like, okay, put out this fire. And one of the challenges when you have a group of users using a service religiously or every day is you can't just say, oh, delete it and start over, which I would love to do.
It's a mulligan. I think that's a mulligan, right? Yeah.
I would love to do. No, you have to actually maintain it, work through it, and make changes while there's people in the system. And some of these changes are scary because it may cripple things, and you're always dealing with trying to maintain and earn user trust. So that was certainly a challenge, and we had I'm not a believer in all-nighters. I've done a number of startups in my life. We're a very productive team. We work very hard. We come in the morning, we order in dinner every day. We're usually there till 9 or 10. We work a lot of weekends. We actually had our first, several days of all-nighters in those 2-3 weeks, and it was tough. And people were very tired and stressed out. It was a lot of 2-hour nights, 1-hour nights, and just to try to get the system into a place. We quickly introduced the reservation line, as you remember, and that was sort of in response to the load. Some people think it was a marketing technique. It absolutely was not. We've almost eliminated the line. It's effectively eliminated, and pretty shortly here it's just eliminated. So we're past all of those sort of issues. But fortunately, it took us that month. We worked through it, and now we're back into sort of plan. And we could say, okay, what do we want to do? What do we want to focus on? And we've made some good strides, and it comes together. And one of my investors said, "Hey, Raj, it's like, hey, you got all these things right. The only thing you didn't plan for was the demand,
the success." Yeah, exactly.
And I said, it's funny. It's because you, as a startup, there's certain things you shouldn't focus on until you launch, and it's not necessarily not building scalable stuff, but it's just you don't assume you're going to blow it out of the water. You don't assume the optimizations around the cost per user. Things like these are things you really shouldn't focus on until there's demand, because it's a waste of engineering resources.
Absolutely.
Well, now we are focusing on it, and it's coming together well.
Yeah, I mean, I classify you guys. I mean, there's a certain level of smart applications, and just to use your term, smart. I think of an app like Dave Lieb, who runs Bump. came out with Flock, which was a photo sharing application that just resides in the background and nothing changes. But as soon as you take a photo with somebody in proximity that when you leave that area, it says, hey, would you like to share those photos with that person? Really simple. Like, I love these little nuanced pieces that fit into your life without changing the way you use a tool, just like the calendar. Another one is a guy by the name of Sampo Karjalainen, who created Moves, the Moves app, right? Which I love that app. Sure. And both these guys tell me the same thing, is that Dave would go out and he doesn't like to market this. He doesn't like to spend money on marketing. He'll do it kind of stealthily, and then it'll all of a sudden have 100 million downloads. Sampo, same thing that happened to you guys happened to Sampo and Moves, is that he was overwhelmed by the response, right? It was overwhelming. I think that the tie-in here is Scoble. So if you're listening, you might want to reach out to Robert Scoble if you think you have something that's unique. But he said, literally, when he described the issue, the same issue that you had, he said they were backing up computers, like servers, right? They just had trucks of servers coming in. They were plugging them in as fast as they could to accommodate the demand. And he said his entire company changed from this engineering focused into literally like movers, right? To get computers in and quickly. So and you've been through this before. And 37 Signals guys, they put out their book and they said, listen, don't over-engineer something until you need to over-engineer something, right? But what kind of advice could you give somebody who might be onto something, that is worried that the impact of their launch is going to bring their company down? Because you can be so successful that it kills you, right?
Yeah, it certainly kills you for that couple weeks. And the thing I was going to add to that, the thing that people forget, it's not even just scaling, it's the volume of chatter. So there's emails coming in at like Twitter kind of rates. There's Twitter coming in at its normal Twitter rates. There's just posts in different forums. And so you have all of this media to sort of manage simultaneously. And you're a small team. I mean, we were 8 people at launch. We're now 12. We're about to be 13. So we've grown. But we were 8 at launch. And that's a very small group. I mean, companies, Office, Microsoft, 5,000 people, they've got a lot of people to help support. God, what kind of advice could I provide? I think I know if I went back in time, something I probably didn't do a good enough job with was really putting pressure on testing all of in our particular use case, testing all of the extremes. People with 85,000 emails a day, people with 5,000 attachments a day, people with 100,000 contacts. In my world, that would have made a big difference. The other thing, we spent some time doing load testing, so it's not like we didn't do load testing, but we clearly didn't push it. We used all of the comparative metrics in this category in terms of what we could expect at launch for a productivity-focused app, and none of them came close to what we actually did, and sort of told me that, hey, you really can't predict it. It might be, it might just go crazy. So I think having a plan around that would be nice. I think the other thing too is, and this is where it's tricky. There certainly was some press that we had given Tempo to before our launch. What we didn't plan for was the number of sort of syndicated write-ups that just went crazy. And we could have tried to slow it down, but this is where it's tricky because you don't know if it's going to work or not work, and you really want to come out with a bang. And so that's kind of a hard thing to manage. But we had a lot of follow-on write-ups that were, for the most part, I want to say 95% of them were very positive. Yeah, and so that we have done zero press. I mean, pretty much since we've launched, it's been all organic, and so that obviously caused its own sort of challenges. It's just trying to figure out if you can manage the flow of people over the week instead of getting it on the first day. But I guess the last thing is really, can you build into the system some kind of fail-safe? I don't know what that is. We had to do it. We had to build a reservation system in 48 hours with all of this going on, and we did, and we submitted it and got it in the App Store like 2 days later. But it was not trivial, and I don't know if that's the right approach. I do know Apple's thinking about how to deal with this, just sort of at a macro level. They talked about should they allow invitation systems,
Right. Reservation systems.
Yeah, invitation, reservation, some kind of, because they're recognizing that it's a problem for more server-heavy applications, especially startups. If you're not Google and don't have, you could write non-scalable software at Google and still be okay because you have so much hardware.
Absolutely, yeah, they do. They have islands of servers, right? So the computational power. Well,
correct. I don't. It's tricky. I don't know what the other thing you could argue is maybe spend more time in another country when you're doing your out-of-market testing and actually PR it. Maybe launch it in another country first. So don't launch it in the U.S. and then at least in the worst case, it's a smaller population. It won't go too crazy, and you can manage.
Yeah, and what, Canada's not bad for that. I would do that.
I think my understanding is that Canada, as much as they might say they get apps 6 months after the U.S., they seem to get a lot of apps 6 months before the U.S. as well.
Yes. Well, as I said, our population is very connected. When you think about Canadians, in the U.S. you just crossed that threshold of 50% own a smartphone. It's 22 to 26 million people in that range out of Canada. So it's almost 3/4 of the population carry a smartphone in here, and really, really connected country. But just last thing on marketing, and then I got two finishing questions. But the last thing on marketing was Scoble the biggest impact did he have? What was the biggest impact thing that happened as a result of all that press that you did before the launch and during the opening days of the launch? Like was Scoble the catalyst for you guys?
Scoble's been an absolute friend and fan of Tempo, and I have nothing but amazing things to say about Robert Scoble.
Yeah.
And he's been a supporter, and we're continuing to share insight with him and so forth. And he really just loves the category, and I think he very much gets that context is the next wave. But at the same time, I don't want to undercut anyone else that we had spoken to. What I think really played well is there is a chunk of this audience, press, whatever you want to call it, that actually use Tempo as their default calendar, and the best way to win someone over is if they're a user of your product. And if they use your product, then everything else just falls into place. And so that's a tough bar, but that is the bar, and they see a lot of things, right? So it's hard to get their home screen, but if you get their home screen, you're in a good spot. And so, so we were fortunate to have that kind of outcome. Plus, there was just many other things that were sort of swimming in our direction. Our SRI pedigree, Siri. Frankly, I think we were the first calendar announcement, and then I think Sunrise was the week after, and there were some others. But we sort of started a tidal wave, then Mailbox got acquired, and so this hype just kept going on itself. We weren't trying to create any hype, but you go on Twitter, there's a lot of fans of Tempo.
Serendipity. A lot of it has to do with serendipity, right? It's kind of shit luck ultimately that timing and luck kind of overlap. Because I'm always fascinated by this when there's groupings of applications that are launched within weeks of each other, right? So
it's a little. I don't think it's completely luck, and I'm not saying that from our standpoint. Sorry, what I mean is I don't think it's completely random. Right. So there's an inside circuit, right? So there's sort of what you see and what the consumer sees, but there's insider information. Yeah. We're very tied into the venture community here in the Valley. We know that there's things coming. We're like, I knew of, Donna, for example, I knew of since over a year ago. That was mentioned, I think, a couple days ago. So, I knew that some of these things were coming. And that people talk, and they all have friends, and like, hey, they're thinking about announcing this time frame. They're thinking about, so that sort of plays. The other thing that happens, and this is very normal, is if something comes out and it completely blows it away from a sort of adoption, customer market fit, whatever you want to call it, press standpoint, and I think that happened with Tempo, where there was just so much interest that everybody will then start repositioning their messaging. Or re-pivoting their messaging to jump onto the bandwagon. So if tomorrow it becomes, hey, some new kind of video thing is the new hot thing. All of these like photo sharing companies will now talk about video, right? So, and it happens over and over again. It's just what it is. And so there's a lot of noise in the category, and part of that noise is the noise has been created, but I will see, there'll be a lot of shakeout, and I think I am not one bit concerned. We have a lot of users, a lot of happy users, and I think the stuff that we're doing, the real delta is only sort of beginning, because the stuff we're doing is going to be based on much more AI than we've shown today.
Well, and that's it. In speculating, I keep thinking about where this goes, and if you remove yourself from the calendaring thinking, right? And this is my last train of thought here. My last questions is around this: is that if you remove yourself from just the idea of calendar, and you talk about intent and context, the sky ends up being the limit when you reach a threshold of users where the value that you can contribute as a result of the stuff that people put into the calendar all of a sudden escalates, right? Like I can, just as an example, we talked about this on the way, right, or earlier in this episode. Which must seem like years for you right now. Like, didn't we start this in 2011? This conversation, the idea that, look, I have a meeting, right, and I put it into my calendar. It's a very simple idea here, but I have a meeting that I put into my calendar, and it's at this location. And then, what does Tempo do? It goes out and tells me to, what's around. Parking. Okay, well now I just want to pay for my parking as a result. I want to do it like a seamless process. Like I just want to book it. That's the place that I normally park. Pay for the parking. It's done with the digital parking meters, and you start to think about in that like reservation systems, and then you start to think about payments, and you start to think about product and marketing and all those things. Like this must, now that you're in there, this stuff must swirl around in your head like, oh, we could do this, and so where does this go for you guys? And to me, it doesn't seem like there's an end.
So I think calendar as a platform is the right thing, right way to think about it. There's something that's non-obvious. There's two kinds of calendar users that we see from our data. And this is something we recognized a while ago. There are people who have approximately 4 events a week and birthdays. And of those 4 events, 2 or 3 of them are Facebook events. That's sort of one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is double booked. They're basically lots of meetings, back to back, almost back to back, pretty much every day. They're just moving between meetings. The key here is there are all sorts of contextual actions that you could bring into the calendar, as you mentioned yourself. Whether it's send gift, buy flowers, buy coffee, book a table, book a flight, whatever it might be. The key is sort of looking at your data and figuring out what are the biggest bangs for your buck. And we have a lot of data to know where we should focus in terms of what kind of contextual actions we want to bring. But the other part of it that is less obvious is there's not only actions, there's more kinds of data that we can actually bring into the event. We surface things about the people, about the places, about the conference call, and so forth. But what about the company? What about your meeting notes? What about other sorts of semantic data that we can associate to that event? This effectively becomes more and more Uber preparation, productivity, whatever you want to call it. And then the third thing that's also non-obvious is other kinds of calendar events. We're pretty good at understanding lunches, dinners, breakfasts, one-on-ones, team meetings, things like that. But let's say your event in your calendar said go to the gym, or let's say it said do 4 push-ups, take a 15-minute swim. What's nice about Tempo is this natural language system. So it actually knows that all of those events mean the same thing. They're all about working out. That's the intent. And so the question is, what do you want to see if you knew that it was about working out? And that's where it gets really interesting. So every event is a statement of intent. So there's more and more intents that we want to support, just like Siri's trying to support more and more domains. And so you're going to continue to see new kinds of experiences. But the key with all of this is we're constantly running 80-20s, meaning like, okay, go to the gym. Well, what percentage of our population, of our user base goes to the gym? right? And we know that because we can actually run that stat.
But that is incredible. I mean, that is like you ultimately have the patterns and the habits. Like I would say that when you guys succeed at a huge level, you'll have as much or more qualitative data and quantitative data than the credit card companies. Right? Like seriously,
we know where you spend your money, certainly.
But then you also know all the side habits where I don't spend money, where I don't put down dollars, but you know that I go there, I do this, I'm here,
Yeah, in a funny way, what we know is what you plan on doing. We don't know what you actually did.
It's so true.
So most people put gym in their calendar, and they don't actually go to the gym.
How true is that?
Because we don't track anything in the background. Obviously, it's something we can do, but we don't do it today. But one other thing I was going to point out that's, again, very non-obvious in a semantic system. There is a semi-misperception that more data makes the system smarter. There's some truth to that, but more data also increases the noise. Right. And so there's this constant balance or tightrope that you're walking where what is the right amount of data without polluting the data? A great example is, Tempo tries to figure out who you're meeting with. I don't know what you put for this meeting. Maybe you put call with Raj. Maybe it figured out who Raj was from our email communication or whatever it might be. But, if you included all of your Facebook contacts, it doesn't, it's too bright.
Yeah. It does. I mean, it certainly. I was going to say that because I have a call with John later on this afternoon. We'll say, and I just said call with John, but it mined enough so that it actually pulled up his full name, right, in the meeting thing.
Yeah, and you probably have a lot of Johns in your big address book between your Facebook, your LinkedIn, right? But this is where, like, well, hey, why don't you integrate all the public Johns in the world too? And this is where it starts breaking down, right? So there's this constant sort of right amount of data. Semantic systems don't always perform better with more data. There's sort of a right amount, and a lot of the work that we have done over the last year, to be honest, has been tuning. And there's a lot of subtle things that you may not notice within Tempo that were heavily debated. Even the use of the word searched and found. So Tempo searched and found these items. That used to be Tempo suggested. That's what it used to say, but suggested at a higher connotation. And the problem was when you were wrong, because people said, hey, it's not working. But when you say search, they think Google search, and it's like, oh, okay, it's just search results. I get it.
There's an allowable error limit or error rate in that, right? With that
of course,
search,
exactly, and that's why. But then people were like, well, then it seems dumb. It seems like you're just doing a keyword search. Well, we said, so the way we actually corrected that was we number our results. Again, a very non-obvious thing, but the results in Tempo are actually numbered to indicate rank and score. And we have some other ideas, but there was a lot of little UI things like that that were debated. I'm actually doing a talk in a couple of weeks on designing AI interfaces, and I talk about some of these things because I call this designing 95% UI, because the problem with AI interfaces is you never know if you're right or wrong. So you're always designing for, I'm pretty sure this is correct, but I'm not 100%. And it's not as forgiving as something like a Pandora or Netflix, where if the recommendation's wrong, you just zip past it. Here is like, this is critical stuff. It needs to be, if it feels too wrong all the time, you stop using it. It's a very delicate balance.
It's so fascinating, this whole space, and I think that you're right. We're in the outer limits or outer reach of this, and I think that there are a number of early adopter companies, and entrepreneurs like yourself that really understand, that can hone in and understand exactly what the implication of this kind of platform is going to do for us, and so this is always fascinating to me. I love these kind of applications. I think that there are probably 6 that I use that are like this in varying degrees. But I believe that the fight, like people are fighting right now for living rooms, they're fighting for car dashboards, but I believe that the fight for the human and this device and the connectivity is through the calendar, and the calendar is that platform. And I'm so fascinated to see what happens. I'll tell you, my favorite feature of it all, though, of the whole thing, is that I can customize the little photo on the top. Right? Like it's a, you're not gonna be able to see this, but it's a customized photo that you can just put at the very top. I love that. I don't know why, but it's a simple touch that I think that changes the calendar into a personal tool for me. And that's my.
I'm glad you like that. We're gonna improve that too. You can You can
Well, I'd like to
run
get a
all your
feed in
photos.
there or something, but
That's exactly what we're going to enable.
I love it. All right. So listen, Raj, I've now spent an hour with you. I've probably got 2.5 more hours of questions that I could go through, but I'm going to cut it off because I'm cognizant of your time. So should people can go download this?
Absolutely.
iOS only. Go to Tempo.ai if you're interested in finding more information. I don't know why after this you wouldn't just go and download it. And if you haven't downloaded it, shame on you already. Come on, you guys who are listening are the advanced people.
And it will get better.
Well, I use it. It's now replaced my default calendar, and I've tried every other one. Trust me, I've spent money on calendars everywhere, and I wish at some point to be able to pay you some money to use this thing because it's that good. So go and download it from the App Store, or just go to, if you want some more information about it, go to Tempo.ai. Is there anything else I should tell people, Raj?
That's basically it. We have please send your product feedback.
Nice.
We're ranking and going through so much, and I love hearing how people are using it. And if anything, that one thing that we have learned from launch is how disparate calendar use is, from the soccer mom to the university student to the sales executive to the barista.
It must be. It's got to be overwhelming. Like I'm going to have you back on just to talk about the data that you're collecting. Like when you come out with that report. You come out with that report,
we're ready to talk about it.
I think it's fascinating. Yeah. So you've heard this here. You've heard me say it a couple of times throughout this episode and before, and certainly the smart guys like Raj and his team, like Dave Lieb, like Sampo, like these guys that are creating these intent-based, contextualized, environments or experiences. This is fascinating. The calendar as a platform. You will start to see this. It will be enabling, and we're starting to see these things pop up all over the place. So go and try Tempo, and I'd love your feedback. Reach out to me, rob@untether.tv. You can go to Tempo.ai and fill out their forms as well and get in touch with them. I'm fascinated, but I love this application. And Raj, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you. Awesome.
For you guys who are still listening, still watching, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, you've scheduled this somehow, you put it in your calendar, and I appreciate that so much. And please reach out if you have any feedback or if there's anybody else that you would like to see on the show. I will do my best to get them on here. But wherever you are, whatever you're doing, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Untether.tv. Raj, thank you.
Thanks, Rob.